deaf boy, flying for the first time with his grandmother. A cup of iced tea and a canine dog that suddenly broke training and leapt to stop him from drinking. What seemed like a small airport moment unraveled into a chilling trafficking plot that reached across continents. How did they target Ethan, and why? Stay with this story, and if you care about stories where instinct saves lives, like this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't believe what Axel the dog had already seen and remembered. The morning sun slanted sharply through the tall windows of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport. The crowds were already in full swing, lines at the check-in counters, the hum of roller bags, the occasional overhead announcement breaking through the steady din. Amid this controlled chaos, an elderly woman in a navy wool coat guided a small boy toward the TSA security checkpoint. Her hand was steady but gentle on his shoulder. "Ethan, sweetheart, stay close to me, all right?" She spoke clearly, enunciating each word so her grandson could read her lips. Ethan looked up and nodded. The faint buzz from his cochlear implant pressed behind his right ear was already starting to bother him. Too much noise, too much vibration. But he was trying his best. His small fingers clutched the loop of his grandmother's purse with determined precision. This was Ethan's first time flying. Not just his first flight, his first big trip without his parents. His grandmother, Margaret Collins, had promised to take him to California for the summer. She had prepared him well, explained every step, rehearsed the airport process, even practiced the lip-reading cues he'd need if the implant overwhelmed him. But now, inside this cavernous, echo-hilled terminal, Ethan felt his confidence start to fray. The rolling announcements seemed to bounce off every surface, overlapping, turning to a meaningless jumble. His implant couldn't filter them out fast enough. The edges of his vision shimmered with growing stress. Margaret noticed the flicker of discomfort in her grandson's wide brown eyes. She leaned down and signed gently into his free hand. "Almost there. Security first. Then we'll find a quiet spot." Ethan nodded again, managing a small smile. The boy had always been brave, much braver than his 8 years might suggest. The loss of hearing at birth hadn't dimmed his spirit, but Margaret also knew that airports were designed for efficiency, not comfort. For a sensitive child like Ethan, this place was an emotional minefield. Nearby, a pair of canine officers entered the terminal. One was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a weathered ball cap and a measured stride. The other, padding loyally at his side, was Axel, a lean, muscular German shepherd with striking amber eyes. The pair had been working JFK's canine unit together for 4 years. Axel was one of the terminal's most seasoned dogs, trained in narcotics, explosives, and chemical agents. He was known for his laser focus and almost uncanny instincts. This morning's rotation was supposed to be routine. Periodic sweeps of high-traffic areas, followed by a scheduled training exercise later in the afternoon. Handler Rick Lawson had worked plenty of these shifts. Axel was steady as always. His leash hung loose in Rick's left hand. His right rested lightly near his duty belt. The two moved as one through the weaving crowds of travelers. At that moment, Margaret and Ethan cleared security without issue. Ethan visibly relaxed once past the metal detectors. Margaret steered him toward a small cafe near Gate 23, a place she'd spotted earlier with wide windows and comfortable seating, and importantly, less foot traffic. They settled at a corner table. Margaret ordered a bottle of water for herself and an iced fruit tea for Ethan. He took his seat, clutching his backpack protectively on his lap, eyes following the rhythmic patterns of people moving past. Rick and Axel began their patrol sweep near Gate 23. Axel's nose worked efficiently as they passed kiosks and luggage stacks. To Rick, it looked like any other busy travel day. That is, until they approached the cafe. Without warning, Axel's body stiffened, his head jerked sharply to the left, nostrils flaring. Rick caught the sudden tension in the leash and froze. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, dropping instinctively into a half-crouch. Axel ignored his handler's quiet command. His gaze locked onto something inside the cafe, something beyond Rick's immediate view. He strained forward, ears pricked, hackles barely raised. Rick's eyes followed the dog's line of sight. At first, he saw only families and travelers hunched over pastries and coffee. Then he noticed the small boy with the dark curls and the older woman seated nearby. Rick frowned. Axel wasn't reacting aggressively, There was no bark, no overt sign of threat. But the dog's focus was unshakable, his alert posture undeniable. He seemed drawn toward that table, or more specifically, the drink on it. Rick gave a gentle tug on the leash. "Axel, heel," he commanded firmly. Axel obeyed, but reluctantly. His gaze flicked back toward the cup again and again as Rick led him past. The dog's behavior didn't fit any known profile for narcotics or explosive residue. Rick made a mental note but chose not to intervene immediately. It was too soon to cause a scene, especially with a child involved. As they continued their sweep, Rick keyed his radio discreetly. "Base, this is K9 Unit 4, possible anomaly at Gate 23 Cafe. No clear threat identified yet. Requesting discreet follow-up." Back at the table, Ethan sipped cautiously at his drink, unaware of the brief scrutiny he and his grandmother had just drawn. Margaret smiled reassuringly, oblivious to the dog's subtle signals. For now, all seemed well, but Axel's instincts, honed through years of relentless training and hard-won experience, whispered otherwise. Something was off, very off, and Axel never ignored that whisper. Rick Lawson continued guiding Axel down the corridor, the leash taut but controlled, trying to refocus the dog's attention on their sweep. They passed a pair of TSA officers chatting by the newsstand, a cluster of businessmen scrolling through their phones, and a family juggling strollers and carry-ons. Yet Axel's posture remained tense, his amber gaze flicking backward with a frequency Rick could no longer ignore. Something about that moment at the cafe gnawed at both of them. Rick had worked with Axel long enough to know when a reaction stemmed from momentary distraction and when it was something deeper. This was deeper. Axel had never broken focus on a target unless there was a reason. They reached the far end of Terminal 4's concourse, pivoted near Gate 27 and began their return sweep. Axel's steps grew quicker, more eager, ears pricked as though drawn by an invisible thread. Rick exhaled sharply, tapped his radio. "Base, K9 Unit 4. I'm circling back to Gate 23. Possible behavioral confirmation. Will advise." A clipped acknowledgement came through, and Rick allowed Axel a little more slack. The German Shepherd surged forward with purpose. As they neared the cafe again, Rick slowed them deliberately, pretending to scan the crowd while observing Axel closely. The dog's head lifted, nose twitching as they approached the table where the boy and his grandmother still sat. Now Axel was in full alert mode. Body lowered slightly, tail rigid, eyes locked on the plastic cup of iced tea. Rick frowned. No residual scent of known narcotics or explosives had registered earlier. Could it be something new? A trace chemical from cleaning agents? Food contamination? Or worse, a substance engineered specifically to avoid standard detection profiles? Rick murmured under his breath, "Easy boy, stay." But Axel ignored the heel command entirely, shifting forward until the leash strained again. He let out a low, guttural whine, not the sharp bark of aggression but a sound Rick had heard only twice before. Once when detecting fentanyl during a warehouse bust, and once when unmasking a hidden stash of chemical precursors during a high-profile raid. Both times, something had been off at the molecular level, something too subtle for human senses. Rick felt a prickle at the base of his neck. Axel wasn't reacting to a person or movement. He was reacting to the drink. The boy was now fiddling with a handheld game device, headphones resting around his neck. The elderly woman beside him had her phone out, scrolling through emails. Neither noticed the K9 officer or his dog observing them from 10 feet away. Rick tapped his radio again, voice low. "Base, Unit 4, requesting plainclothes backup at Gate 23 Cafe. Potential chemical anomaly. Not hostile yet. Caution advised." While waiting for a reply, Rick shifted position slightly to watch the table from a better angle. He spotted the brand of the cup, an iced tea from Pacific Brew, a national chain with locations inside most domestic terminals. Drinks from that outlet were pre-approved and should have cleared all standard security checks. Yet Axel's behavior said otherwise. Moments later, Agent Maria Chen from airport security arrived in plain clothes, her badge tucked discreetly under a jacket. Rick nodded toward the table. Dog flagged that drink twice, broke command to come back here. Maria raised an eyebrow. Pacific Brew? Their stock gets scanned and cleared like everything else past security. Rick nodded grimly. Exactly. which means either the product was contaminated post-screening or someone tampered after the fact. The grandmother didn't bring outside items through. The bottle likely came from that location. Maria glanced at Axel, who remained frozen, gaze locked on the cup as if willing it to reveal its secret. "You want to approach them?" she asked quietly. Rick shook his head. "Not yet. No overt threat. Let's confirm first. Get eyes on surveillance from that outlet." Maria keyed her radio and spoke in code, summoning video review for Pacific Brew's last 30 minutes of transactions. Meanwhile, Rick crouched to Axel's level, speaking softly. "Show me, buddy. You sure?" Axel gave a barely perceptible nod, a behavior Rick had trained carefully over years. When uncertain, the dog deferred. But now his posture left no doubt. Something about the chemical composition in that drink triggered an alert beyond normal training. Across the terminal, security analysts pulled up camera feeds. Within minutes, a disturbing detail surfaced. At 9:04 a.m., Margaret Collins had purchased the drinks. Surveillance showed her ordering an iced tea and a bottled water. The clerk had prepped the tea behind the counter, poured from a sealed container into the cup. All normal until a man wearing a Pacific Brew apron stepped into frame, placing a second lid on the drink moments before handing it off. The timestamp showed a subtle gap, 3 seconds where the cup was out of standard prep view. The man then exited through a side door, face partially obscured. When cross-referenced with staff rosters, no such employee matched current shift logs. Maria's voice was tight over the radio. "You've got a problem. That server's unauthorized uniform presence requested near Gate 23. Rick's pulse quickened. "Don't spook the civilians yet," he cautioned. "The kid already started drinking. If there's contamination, we need medical ready. Fast." Rick's jaw tightened. "That's it. We intervene, now." Maria approached the table carefully, flashing her badge. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt. We need to speak with you about that beverage. Please don't let your grandson drink further." Margaret looked up, startled. "What? Why?" Ethan glanced between them, confused but sensing tension. Rick spoke gently. "We did something abnormal. For safety, we need to test the drink. No cause for alarm, but it's important." Margaret's face paled. "I bought it at the cafe. It's just tea." Rick nodded. "Understood. But the prep process may have been compromised." Maria radioed for emergency medical. Meanwhile, Rick collected the cup carefully using gloves, placing it into a sealed containment bag. Axel remained by Ethan's side, body pressed close in protective posture, a gesture Rick had not commanded. The boy instinctively reached out, fingers brushing the thick fur. His grandmother watched, shaken. Rick met her gaze. "We'll explain everything, but right now we need to move quickly." Across the terminal, unseen eyes were already watching the unfolding scene. The tension around Gate 23 had thickened palpably. Maria Chen discreetly positioned herself just to the left of the small table where Margaret and Ethan sat, her eyes flicking between the boy's pale face and Rick Lawson's deliberate movements. The sealed containment bag now held the original cup of iced tea. But before any further samples could be retrieved or explanations given, the grandmother had instinctively purchased a second drink after the security agents stepped aside. The boy, confused and unsettled, had reached for this new cup with trembling fingers. Margaret had tried to soothe him, offering the fresh iced tea as a calming gesture. She hadn't fully absorbed the gravity of the unfolding situation, still clinging to the notion that perhaps this was all a misunderstanding, a glitch in an overcautious security system. Rick's instincts screamed otherwise. As Axel shifted beside him, nose twitching in sharp, deliberate bursts, Rick reached out a hand, palm open. "Ma'am," he began, voice tight but controlled. "Please don't let him drink that. We need to be certain." But his words were too late. Ethan had already gripped the cup, straw angled toward his lips, eyes wary but trusting his grandmother's reassurances. In that fraction of a second, Axel reacted. The German shepherd launched upward with a fluid, desperate motion, a growl reverberating through his chest as he struck the boy's arm with enough force to knock the cup from his grasp. The plastic container flipped mid-air, its contents spraying in a shimmering arc before crashing onto the tile floor with a hollow slap. Ice scattered like tiny glass shards. Tea pooled rapidly, seeping between the grouted seams beneath the table. Gasps rippled through the surrounding crowd. Travelers turned in alarm, some clutching children, others pulling phones from pockets. Margaret shrieked in shock. "What on earth?" she cried, clutching Ethan instinctively to her side. The boy's wide eyes darted from the spilled liquid to the towering German Shepherd now positioned squarely between him and the fallen cup. Body taut, teeth bared in a low, warning snarl. Rick was already moving. He grabbed Axel's harness with one hand while signaling Maria with the other. "Get clean up, we need to contain that spill." Into his radio he barked. "Base, priority. Possible contaminant exposure at Gate 23. Secondary sample compromised. Request hazmat kit immediately." Maria crouched swiftly, pulling sterile gloves from her inner pocket. Margaret, still shaking, tried to protest. "He's just a dog, he knocked it over." Ethan wasn't doing anything. Rick met her eyes, gaze unflinching. "Ma'am, Axel has served for 4 years. He has never once reacted without cause. We need to trust his instinct and act fast." Passengers nearby were murmuring now, some speculating aloud, others whispering anxiously. "Crazy dog," one man muttered, shaking his head. Another younger woman frowned. "Or maybe it smelled something. You saw how it moved." Maria began carefully swabbing the edges of the spill with a rapid test strip from her field kit. Her hands moved with clinical precision honed by years of handling potential hazmat scenes. Axel remained locked in position, every muscle coiled, nose tilted toward the evaporating mist of volatile compounds rising from the tea. Within moments, a faint, acrid scent became perceptible even to untrained human senses. A sharp, metallic edge that didn't belong in any beverage. Rick caught it first, his military-abilished instincts kicking into overdrive. "Do you smell that?" he asked tightly. Maria nodded grimly. "That's not sugar or lemon." She lifted the strip toward the portable analyzer clipped to her belt. The small device beeped softly as data streamed across its narrow display. Maria read the results aloud, voice low but steady. "Volatile organics detected. Not in the controlled database. Chemical signature unknown. Definitely not standard flavoring agents." Rick swore under his breath. "Which means we've got a live substance likely engineered to bypass routine scans." Margaret's face blanched further. "But I bought it from the cafe. It's just tea, I swear." Rick placed a firm but not unkind hand on her arm. "Believe you. But this confirmed someone tampered with that product before you ever touched it." Meanwhile, security backup had begun to arrive, cordoning off the area under the pretext of a small chemical spill. The travelers were redirected, some craning their necks for a better view. Ethan, shaken but physically unharmed, clung now to Axel's thick ruff, as if sensing the dog's protective presence. The German Shepherd allowed it, gaze never leaving the now glimmering puddle beneath the table. Maria relayed the chemical findings back to Central Command. The reply was swift but unsettling. The substance did not match any known narcotic explosive precursor or regulated poison in TSA's standard profiles. That left 2 possibilities: either a cutting-edge designer compound or a targeted agent crafted for a very specific purpose. Rick's gut churned. This wasn't random contamination. It was deliberate and precise. He motioned for a biohazard container. "We need full sample extraction. Notify CDC liaison. This might go higher than airport security." Axel finally relaxed his stance fractionally, sensing his immediate task was complete, though his gaze remained wary. Rick knelt beside the dog, murmuring praise. "Good boy, Axel, you saved that kid's life." Margaret looked between them, realization dawning at last. "You think someone meant to poison my grandson?" Her voice trembled. Rick didn't sugarcoat. "That's exactly what we think." Across the terminal, surveillance teams were already combing through footage of Pacific Brew's employee entrances and prep stations. Meanwhile, field chemists were en route to run deeper tests on the samples now secured in sterile vials. The mysterious chemical signature hung in the air like a silent alarm. And somewhere in the sprawling maze of JFK International, a figure watched the escalating scene through a discreet camera feed. Expression hidden, intent. Rick Lawson's fingers drummed steadily against the cool metal of the portable containment kit as he stood beside Maria Chen, watching the first batch of field test results flicker across the handheld analyzer's display. Around them, the temporary cordon at Gate 23 had been expanded with subtle efficiency, masking the seriousness of the situation from the broader terminal crowd. The travelers continued to be rerouted, unaware that a deliberate poisoning attempt had just been averted by a German Shepherd with sharper instincts than any machine in the building. Nearby, Ethan sat clutching Axel's thick fur, the boy's face pale but composed, a quiet trust already forged between him and the dog that had knocked the tainted drink from his grasp. Margaret Collins, shaken but holding firm, remained close, her worried eyes darting between the officers, the containment units, and the small team of hazmat specialists, now arriving in pairs. Maria's voice cut through the low hum of controlled chaos. "Rick, initial readouts in." She tilted the screen toward him. Rick leaned closer, scanning the chemical profile with narrowed eyes. "Delayed onset neurotoxin," Maria read aloud. "Synthetic base, structurally similar to certain experimental compounds flagged in an Interpol bulletin 6 months ago. Not designed for immediate lethality. Rather, progressive neurodegradation." Rick's jaw tightened. Symptoms: mascot for dizziness, fatigue, possible speech and motor coordination issues. Escalates over days or weeks depending on dosage. Targets synaptic pathways. Permanent damage possible. Rick exhaled sharply. It was meant to slip under the radar. No standard screen would have caught that on ingestion. Maria nodded grimly. An airport medical wouldn't recognize the symptoms immediately. It would have looked like a delayed illness. Rick's gaze flicked toward Ethan, a cold knot forming in his stomach. 8-year-old boy. Smaller body mass. Full dose would have wrecked him in days. Margaret overheard, her face blanching. She clutched Ethan tighter, her voice trembling. "But he's okay now, right? He didn't drink any." Maria offered a small, reassuring nod. "No ingestion. He's safe. But we'll recommend observation just in case." Rick straightened, jaw set. This wasn't random contamination. Someone placed that dose deliberately. They targeted this kid. A voice from Central Command responded crisply. "We've got surveillance confirmation. You're going to want to see this." Maria gestured for Rick to follow, and the two of them moved swiftly to the nearby command post, hastily established in a closed-off gate lounge. A bank of monitors displayed looping security footage from Pacific Brew's interior prep area and public ACE encounter. The operator rewound the time lock. Margaret's familiar profile appeared on the screen, approaching the counter with Ethan at her side. The clerk on duty, a young woman in a red visor and standard company polo, took her order and began preparing the drinks. So far, so normal. Then came the anomaly. At precisely 9:07, as the iced tea was poured into a branded cup, another figure entered from a side access door. Male, mid-30s, lean build, baseball cap shadowing part of his face. He wore a matching Pacific Brew apron but no visible company badge or name tag. The shift roster had already confirmed no such individual was scheduled or authorized on the floor that morning. The footage continued. The man approached the counter casually, exchanged a few words with the young clerk, who appeared slightly confused but not alarmed, then reached for the iced tea cup under the pretense of securing the lid. The clerk turned away momentarily to attend another customer. In that brief window, the man produced a small, dark object from his apron pocket, tilting it subtly over the drink. His hand moved with practiced economy. 2 seconds, 3 at most. Then the lid was pressed on, the cup wiped with a cloth, and handed off as if nothing had happened. The man then exited through the same side door, vanishing from the primary camera angles. Rick's mouth was a thin line. Professional. Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling additional camera angles from adjacent concourse feeds. The man's route traced a deliberate path through staff corridors rarely used by the public. "He knew the blind spots," Maria muttered. Rick folded his arms. "That wasn't an opportunist, that was placement by design. Someone with inside access or intel on this terminal." Margaret's voice trembled from behind them. She had followed, unable to remain still. "But why? We're no one special. Why target Ethan?" Rick turned, his expression gentler now. "That's what we intend to find out." But in his guts, suspicion was already sharpening. Random poisoning made no sense. A slow-acting neurotoxin delivered in a child's drink suggested premeditation. A calculated plan, one disrupted only by Axel's instinctive response. Maria's radio crackled again. Additional feed ready, loading now. The next segment showed the same suspect entering a maintenance corridor 30 minutes prior to the poisoning event. A moment later, he was seen conversing briefly with an unidentified individual wearing a courier uniform. No clear visual of that second person's face was available, only a partial shoulder patch and a glimpse of dark hair beneath a cap. Rick leaned in. Courier. Could be a drop-off, or he's part of the team. Maria keyed a command. Running badge scans now. If they used cloned credentials to access restricted zones, we'll need TSA to backtrace entry points. Rick's mind raced ahead. Get facial recognition running, and pull full staff entry logs from the past 72 hours. I want to know who knew that shift roster in advance, and who could get that uniform and badge in place. Maria was already typing. On it. Rick glanced back toward the sealed containment kit holding the tainted iced tea sample, then toward the small boy now resting quietly against Axel's protective bulk. Someone had gone to considerable lengths to introduce a sophisticated toxin into that cup. The question was why, and who had known precisely when and where Ethan Collins would be sitting at Gate 23 on a summer morning at JFK International Airport. Rick Lawson stood rigid in front of the monitor as the enhanced image of the suspect flickered to life under the sharp digital filter applied by the security team's AI system. The man's face, partially obscured beneath a baseball cap in the original footage, was now revealed with unnerving clarity. A faint scar ran vertically from his left brow down to the cheekbone, and a narrow jawline hinted at recent weight loss. Maria Chen leaned closer, her fingers poised above the keyboard, cross-referencing Interpol and federal databases now. Rick's eyes remained locked on the screen, a cold knot forming in his gut. The precision of the suspect's movements, the confidence with which he had manipulated both the drink and the surveillance blind spots, screamed of professional experience. Moments later, a new window popped onto the monitor. He confirmed. Maria breathed. Subject identified as Lucas Drexler, alias Lucas Dre, Austrian national, 42 years old, former associate of multiple transnational networks specializing in human trafficking. Rick's knuckles whitened against the edge of the table. Trafficking, he muttered. Maria continued reading. Served 7 years in Austria for aggravated kidnapping and conspiracy to traffic minors. Released on a technicality 3 years ago. Suspected involvement in multiple operations across Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia since then. Last known sighting 6 months ago in Prague. No formal re-entry record into the U.S. Maria nodded grimly. Looks that way, a second analyst chimed in from the adjacent console. Facial match quality 98%, no doubt. Rick straightened, his voice taut. So we've got a convicted trafficker operating inside JFK, posing as a food service employee, targeting a specific child with a sophisticated neurotoxin. Maria's gaze flicked toward him. Targeting Ethan Collins. But why? Rick exhaled slowly. That's the question. He glanced toward the lounge where Margaret and Ethan remained under quiet observation. The boy had begun to relax slightly, soothed by Axel's presence and the gentle assurances of a trained crisis counselor now sitting nearby. His grandmother, however, remained visibly shaken. Maria tapped the keys again, pulling up public data on the Collins family. Margaret Collins, retired schoolteacher, no criminal history. Daughter Emily Collins, deceased. Son-in-law James Collins, marketing executive at a mid-sized firm in California. Single income, moderate financial profile. Ethan, only child, congenital hearing loss, no documented medical anomalies beyond that. Rick frowned. No trust funds? No inheritance? No unusual insurance policies? Maria shook her head. Nothing that stands out. They're a normal, middle-class family. Rick's jaw tightened. Which makes this even more disturbing. Traffickers like Drexler don't operate randomly. They select targets based on vulnerability, opportunity, and sometimes very specific criteria provided by buyers. Maria's stomach turned. You think this was a commissioned hit? Rick nodded grimly. It fits. Slow-acting neurotoxin delivered in a controlled environment. Designed to induce collapse without triggering alarms. Gives abductors a window to stage an emergency intervention, then vanish with the victim before full symptoms manifest. Maria rubbed her temples. But why Ethan? Why this boy? Rick's gaze returned to the monitor. That's what we're going to find out. He keyed his radio. Base, I want a full deep dive on Collins' family connections. Friends, co-workers, recent travel, social media. Anything that might explain why Drexler's crew marked that child. Copy, came the reply. Moments later, a forensic analyst approached with new intel. Agent Chen, we've pulled badge access logs from this morning, The side door Drexler used was accessed with a cloned badge registered to a maintenance contractor. Badge flagged as inactive last month. No employee reported it missing. Maria cursed under her breath. Rick's expression darkened, meaning someone on the inside provided credentials or Drexler's team penetrated the system. The analyst nodded. Either way, we've got a serious breach. Another alert chimed on the screen. Rick, Maria said, voice tense. Another hit. A separate feed from the airport's external cameras showed a dark gray delivery van pulling into a restricted service bay 2 hours prior to the incident. The license plate had been tampered with, partially obscured by grime and a strategic strip of reflective tape. Facial recognition tagged the van's driver with 87% confidence. An unidentified male previously flagged in European trafficking investigations but never positively identified. Rick exhaled slowly. So Drexler had backup on site. Maria's eyes narrowed, which means this wasn't a lone wolf operation. They planned this. Rick's mind raced. But again, why Ethan? Why this family? They're not wealthy, they don't fit the usual profile. Maria pulled another window onto the display, her fingers moving rapidly. Let's look at recent patterns. Has the family traveled anywhere unusual? Any contact with foreign nationals? Anything to suggest they were targeted weeks or months in advance? Initial results showed nothing remarkable. The Collins family had taken only local trips in the past year. California, Arizona, a brief visit to New York to visit Margaret's sister. No flagged international contacts, no suspicious financial transactions. Rick rubbed his jaw. Then, this may not be about money, could be about the child himself. Maria hesitated. You think Ethan was pre-selected based on something else? Rick nodded. Possible. Rare medical profiles, certain genetic markers, even perceived desirability by trafficker standards. The sicker the market, the more specific the requests. Maria shuddered. I hate that you're probably right. Another analyst called over, Agent Chen. We've got background chatter on darknet forums, keywords cross-referencing with Drexler's known alias. Maria and Rick hurried over. A series of fragmented posts appeared on the screen. Phrases like new acquisition pipeline, high value, and special requirements were scattered across encrypted threads linked to known trafficking circles. One chilling message stood out. Confirmed, East Coast pickup scheduled, priority extraction. Asset profile, sensory impaired male under 10. Maria whispered, sensory impaired Ethan. Rick spoke through gritted teeth. He was pre-selected, not random. Someone ordered this. Maria's voice was taut. Then we need to find out who. Fast. Rick nodded, already formulating the next moves. Lock down the terminal. Full review of every entry and exit since this morning. We need to track Drexler's last known position, and we need to know if that van is still on site. Maria keyed her radio. Her units, be advised. Priority 1, suspect Drexler confirmed on premises with likely team support. Target child was specifically selected for abduction. All surveillance to maximum. Sweep for compromised personnel. Rick's gaze drifted once more to the small boy resting against Axel's protective bulk. Somehow, that child had ended up in the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous trafficking networks in the world. And now, with Drexler still unaccounted for inside the sprawling labyrinth of JFK International, time was running out to stop whatever came next. Rick Lawson's jaw remained set as the darknet chatter continued scrolling across the monitors. Maria Chen was already coordinating with surveillance teams and tactical units to widen the net around the terminal. The message confirming a sensory-impaired male under 10 as a target kept replaying in Rick's mind, every word deepening the urgency that now thrummed through his veins. Yet amid the flurry of commands and incoming data, Rick's instincts were drawn back to one steady constant. The German Shepherd had remained unusually alert, not just toward the contaminated area or the immediate threat, but visibly restless, as though sensing that the danger extended beyond the now thin scene at Gate 23. Rick crouched beside him, hands steady on the harness. What is it, buddy? He murmured. Axel's ears twitched, nose working furiously. The dog shifted in place, gaze darting toward the corridor leading past gates 21 through 18. Rick followed the line of tension in Axel's body, reading it like a second language. The dog wanted to move. Rick stood, keyed his radio. Chen, I'm taking Axel. He's picking something up, West Side Concourse. Maria looked over sharply. You think it's related? Rick nodded once. I know that look. He's not done. Maria gave a clipped nod. Go, I'll keep this team here. Rick turned to one of the armed Port Authority officers nearby. You're with me. The officer, a younger man named Ruiz, fell in beside him as Rick loosened Axel's lead and spoke the release command. Track. Without hesitation, Axel surged forward, nose low to the ground, pace quickening to a purposeful trot. Rick and Ruiz moved swiftly behind him, weaving through thinning traveler streams as the late morning lull set in across this wing of the terminal. The concourse gradually emptied as gate change announcements redirected passengers elsewhere. Axel led them past Gate 21, past a janitorial closet, and then made a sharp left toward a recessed service corridor partially cordoned off for maintenance equipment. Rick recognized the area. Beyond this point lay a secured baggage hold used temporarily for overflow or irregular luggage. Axel hesitated only for a moment before pulling harder on the lead, tail stiff, a low growl building in his throat. Rick raised a hand, signaling Ruiz to hold position while he keyed his radio again. Chen, Lawson, we've got movement. K9 is leading us toward secondary baggage hold near Gate 19. Possible stat. Ruiz drew his sidearm, keeping it low and close. Rick shifted Axel to a tighter lead, released the gate lock with a master key, and pushed the door open. The room beyond was cool, dimly lit by overhead fluorescence, filled with rows of steel shelving and stacked carts of unclaimed or delayed luggage awaiting further processing. No staff were present. The door thudded shut behind them, isolating them from the low murmur of terminal noise. Axel's growl deepened as he pulled sharply left toward the third aisle of shelving. Rick kept pace, scanning every angle. The German Shepherd stopped abruptly near a battered black suitcase wedged behind a larger pile of cargo crates marked for rerouting. His body language was unmistakable: alert posture, intense focus, and the distinctive high-pitched whine he reserved for confirmed scent matches. Rick crouched beside the suitcase, visually inspecting it. You got something, boy? Axel's paw tapped the case twice. Then he sat, gaze fixed. Rick's pulse accelerated. Ruiz, cover me. Using gloves, Rick eased the suitcase free from the stack and placed it on the floor in clear space. He examined the tags. No registered owner. Tag number incomplete. Routing label partially torn. Suspicious in itself. He ran a portable scanner over the exterior. No immediate chemical alerts. No explosive signature. Good. He popped the first latch, then the second, slowly lifting the lid. The stale scent of old fabric and plastic wafted out, but beneath it came something else. Photographic paper, the faint acrid tang of developing chemicals. Rick peeled back the first layer of clothing stuffed inside the case. His breath caught. Underneath lay a neatly organized stack of printed photographs. The top image showed Ethan Collins, clear as day, sitting in the terminal with Margaret hours earlier, captured from an elevated angle. The next photo showed Ethan boarding an escalator with his grandmother. Another displayed the boy in the TSA checkpoint line, time-stamped to match their morning arrival. Rick's fingers moved faster now, sorting through dozens more images, some clearly snapped with a long lens from hidden vantage points throughout the terminal. Ethan was in nearly every frame. Ruiz let out a low curse behind him. Jesus, they've been following him since this morning. Rick's voice was ice. Longer than that. Look at the timestamps. They knew his entire schedule. One final layer of the suitcase yielded a thin manila envelope. Rick opened it carefully. Inside were detailed printed documents. Ethan's medical records, birth certificate, school reports, even a diagram of JFK Terminal 4's layout marked with potential interception points. Rick's heart hammered. This was a full acquisition dossier. Someone had been planning Ethan's abduction for weeks, if not longer. He keyed his radio urgently. Chen, confirm. We've got an active acquisition file on target child. Visuals, tracking notes, personal data all staged inside a baggage stash near Gate 19. Maria's reply came back sharp. Understood. Lock it down, forensics en route. Units sweeping adjacent areas now. Rick scanned the surrounding shelving one last time, alert for any signs of a secondary trigger or monitoring device. Nothing obvious. Axel remained posted beside him, tense but calm. Rick met Ruiz's wide-eyed gaze. This wasn't just opportunistic. They built this up, from the ground up. Ruiz swallowed hard. But why this kid? Why Ethan? Rick's voice was low, grim. That's what we still have to find out. In the distance, approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of backup. Rick placed a steadying hand on Axel's shoulder. The dog's ears flicked toward the sound, but his gaze remained fixed on the suitcase and its chilling contents. Somewhere in the labyrinth of JFK, Lucas Drexler or his associates were still out there, aware, perhaps, that their plan had been partially exposed but far from finished. The suitcase lay sealed inside a sterile evidence container as forensic technicians swarmed the baggage hold, snapping high-pins photographs and dusting for latent prints. Rick Lawson stood just outside the cordoned area, Maria Chen at his side, both digesting the implications of what they had just uncovered. A meticulously prepared abduction dossier, complete with surveillance photos and sensitive personal data, confirmed beyond any doubt that Ethan Collins had been marked long before this morning. Yet the question of how the trafficking ring had acquired such detailed intel remained unanswered, gnawing at Rick's mind as he paced. Maria's phone buzzed sharply. She answered, voice crisp. Maria's brows drew together. Say that again. She listened intently for another 10 seconds, then ended the call and turned to Rick. They found the breach. Rick stopped pacing. Talk. Maria motioned toward the makeshift command center. Let's walk and I'll explain. They moved quickly down the service corridor as Maria laid it out. Our cyber team pulled the metadata from Margaret Collins' flight booking. The reservation was made last week through a third-party travel site. During the transaction, her account was compromised via a malicious script embedded in a fake promo banner. Rick exhaled slowly. Classic phishing vector. Maria nodded. Exactly. The malware captured her login credentials and session data, including the full itinerary. Rick's jaw tightened, meaning the traffickers knew exactly when and where they'd be. Maria continued grimly. The script also accessed her email history. That's likely how they obtained Ethan's medical records. Margaret had copies from recent specialist consultations stored in her inbox. Rick's pulse pounded. The breach explains the intel cache in that suitcase. They weren't watching the family in person at first. They had a digital window. Maria added, once they had the itinerary and background, they escalated to live surveillance at the airport. Hence the photos. Rick's mind raced. And if they compromised the booking, the destination airport would be part of the data. Maria's phone buzzed again. Another brief conversation. She ended the call face pale. Rick, we have a problem. He braced. Rick's stomach turned. They're waiting for him in California, Maria confirmed. Yes, the local joint task force is mobilizing as we speak. Surveillance teams are en route to intercept a suspected cell at LGB. The chatter suggests they have 2 vehicles staged for a snatch operation. Rick's fists clenched. They planned this end to end. Even with Drexler's operation here exposed, they were counting on grabbing Ethan after the flight. Maria's voice was taut, which means getting him on that plane is no longer an option. Rick's mind worked rapidly. We need full control of that flight manifest. Nobody boards without clearance. And we need to prep for an extraction op. If there are sleepers already embedded on that plane, we pull them now. Maria was already typing commands into her secure tablet. Agreed. And we'll need to brief the Collins family. Rick nodded grimly. I'll handle that. Back at the secured lounge, Ethan sat quietly with Axel pressed close at his side. The boy's fingers idly stroked the dog's thick ruff, a small island of calm amid the rising storm. Margaret stood nearby, still pale but steady, her gaze searching Rick's face as he entered. You found something else, she said softly. Rick crouched to eye level with Ethan, his tone gentle but direct. Ethan, you've been very brave today. There are some bad people who are trying to hurt you, but you're safe now. Axel will stay with you. The boy nodded solemnly, trusting. Rick rose and addressed Margaret quietly. Your flight booking was hacked. That's how they knew your itinerary. We've also discovered a team waiting at your destination, likely planning to abduct Ethan upon arrival. Margaret swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair. Oh God! Rick's tone remained calm but firm. You will not allow that to happen. We're securing the terminal here and coordinating with authorities in California. For now, we'll need you to remain under our protection until we neutralize this threat. Margaret nodded shakily. Of course. Maria entered moments later with new intel. Rick, Update from LGB. Surveillance confirms 2 black SUVs parked in a long-term lot matching the vehicles flagged in the chatter. Team observed 3 individuals with known ties to Eastern European trafficking cells. Rick's jaw set. They're ready to move. We can't take any chances. Maria added, flight crew has been alerted. TSA agents will screen every passenger and crew member with enhanced protocols. We're also running background checks on standby passengers and last-minute bookings. Rick considered. We need to assume they may attempt to insert a backup asset on that flight. Full sweep of the aircraft before boarding. Maria agreed. Already in motion. Rick glanced toward Ethan, who remained quietly beside Axel. The boy had no idea how close he had come to disaster, nor how valuable his canine guardian had become in the span of a few short hours. Rick's gut told him this operation was far from over. Drexler might be compromised, but the network's reach extended far beyond one man, and someone somewhere had ordered this abduction with chilling precision. Rick keyed his radio. Units. Be advised, threat remains active at both departure and arrival points. Maintain maximum alert status. Secondary exfiltration options being evaluated. Maria looked over. You think they'll try to snatch him here if they can't get him in California? Rick's eyes were hard. If they're desperate enough, absolutely. Maria's expression mirrored his resolve. Then we'd better be ready. Across the terminal, a tactical response team was already assembling in discreet positions. Axel's ears flicked as the quiet tension built once more. The next move belonged to the hunters, and Rick Lawson intended to be ready when it came. The air inside the command center had thickened with tension, as new intel streamed in from both JFK and Long Beach Airport. The realization that Ethan Collins remained a live target driving every decision with sharpened urgency. Rick Lawson's gaze swept the digital wall displays cycling between surveillance feeds, airport schematics, and tactical unit positioning. Beside him, Maria Chen coordinated with DGS and FBI liaisons now looped into the operation. The knowledge that Drexler's network was active on both coasts, confirming the need for immediate containment. Axel sat poised at Rick's side, body tense but eyes alert, the dog's behavior in recent hours raising questions that now demanded answers. A voice from cyber forensics cut through the hum of radio chatter. Agent Chen, Lawson, be advised, secondary ping on Drexler's device, signal detected moving back toward Terminal 4. Rick's head snapped up. Say again. The analyst repeated. Encrypted signal previously linked to Drexler's burner phone just activated near Employee Access Corridor Delta 7, moving inbound. Maria swore under her breath. He's coming back. Rick's mind raced. He thinks he still has time to clean up. Maria keyed her radio. All units, priority intercepted Delta 7. Suspect returning to scene. Rick crouched beside Axel, voice low and urgent. You ready, boy? Axel's ears flicked, nose twitching as though already sensing the shift in atmosphere. Rick glanced toward Maria. Something about this is off. He's not sly. Priority padlock down does. Maria agreed, tone grim. Unless he left something he can't afford for us to find. Tactical teams repositioned silently through the terminal, blending with maintenance staff and airport security. Passengers remained unaware as Terminal 4 subtly shifted into a controlled trap. Every exit point monitored. Unmarked vehicles staged near service doors, operators watching through pinhole cameras embedded in ceiling tiles. Rick adjusted his earpiece as an agent from Tactical 6 approached. Sir, dog with you operational? Rick met the man's gaze. Axel's more than ready. The agent hesitated. Word from DHS rep, they flagged a detail in Axel's old file. You should know. Rick frowned. Go on. The agent spoke quietly. Axel was part of the multi-agency trafficking task force 2 years ago, Operation SableNet. During a warehouse raid in Jersey, he detected a chemical blend used to sedate trafficked children prior to transit. Compound included a unique solvent signature. Rick's heart skipped, and that signature matches what was in Ethan's drink. The agent nodded. Exactly. DHS cross-referenced. That's why your dog reacted the way he did. Rick looked down at Axel, the puzzle pieces snapping into place. The German Shepherd's alert wasn't random or conditioned. It was visceral recognition of a scent linked to trauma and violence he had encountered before. Rick's voice was low. Good boy. You've already saved him once. Let's finish this. Meanwhile, Drexler moved swiftly through Delta 7's shadowed corridor. unaware that his digital breadcrumb trail had exposed him. His face remained calm beneath the cap pulled low, a duffel slung casually over one shoulder, posture betraying no outward urgency, yet his eyes flicked constantly toward security cameras and staff, calculating gaps in coverage. What Drexler did not know was that nearly every camera feed now looped fake footage to conceal the movements of tactical units closing in. Maria's voice crackled in Rick's ear. Subject 3 meters from intersection Delta 7A. Units in position. Lawson, bring the dog. Rick unclipped Axel's lead. Axel surged forward, nose low, body flowing like liquid shadow as Rick moved beside him, service weapon holstered but hand ready. Ahead, the corridor narrowed, service carts abandoned along one wall, a maintenance door ajar. Through his earpiece, Rick heard the whispered countdown. 3, 2, go. Axel broke cover first, bounding through the threshold with a deep, resonant bark that froze Drexler mid-stride. The trafficker's eyes widened as he spun toward the sound, instinctively reaching inside his jacket, but too late. Rick was already moving, voice a sharp command, down. Drexler hesitated, calculating odds, but the sight of Axel lunging toward him broke his resolve. He dropped to his knees, hands lacing behind his head as Tactical 6 agents swarmed in. Rick strode forward, weapon trained, Axel circling with a low growl, body blocking any attempt at sudden movement. You should have stayed gone, Rick muttered coldly. Drexler smirked despite the situation. You think you've stopped it, he said softly. Rick's voice was ice. You failed. We know about Long Beach. Drexler's smile widened. You know nothing. They'll adapt, always do. Maria arrived seconds later, eyes hard. Bag him, full extraction. We'll see how smug he is in federal custody. As agents secured Drexler, we crouched beside Axel, fingers brushing the thick ruff with quiet gratitude. You remembered, didn't you? He murmured. The dog's amber eyes met his, steady and knowing. The trauma of past raids had left scars, but also honed a memory that no machine could replicate. Through the chaos of the unfolding sting, Axel had once again proven why instinct and loyalty remained the most formidable weapons in a fight like this. Maria touched Rick's shoulder. There was no rule of thumb to find a solution. Rick stood, resolve hardening. Then we keep hunting. Across the terminal, unseen by the celebrating agents, a second figure watched from a crowd of oblivious travelers. Expression unreadable. Phone pressed to one ear as the next phase of the operation silently unfolded. The tension that had seemed to ease following Drexler's capture quickly reignited as forensic analysis of the backup cache discovered near Gate 25 yielded alarming new evidence. Among the burner phones and encrypted USB drives were detailed flight logs, communication records, and a list of confirmed contacts inside JFK, one of which sent a chill through Rick Lawson as soon as he read it. Matthew Keller, Assistant Director of Security Operations, JFK Terminal 4. Maria Chen's voice was low but sharp. We've got a problem. This goes deeper than Drexler. Rick's jaw tightened. Show me. Maria keyed in a command, pulling up internal surveillance archives. With a few taps, the screen displayed footage from the previous evening. Keller entering an unmarked security office after hours, accompanied by a man now identified as an associate of Drexler's ring. The two engaged in a brief exchange before Keller handed over a secured tablet used to access TSA's back-end clearance systems. Less than 10 minutes later, logs showed a manual override marked Priority Clearance Issued for Flight 841, the same flight Margaret Collins had booked. Rick exhaled slowly. He scrubbed it, made the manifest look clean. Maria nodded grimly, and authorized last-minute personnel additions flagged as maintenance staff. Those agents were supposed to escort Ethan at LGB. Rick's hands curled into fists. They built the whole trap with inside help. Another voice from cyber forensics cut in. Agent Chen further traced complete funds linked to Keller's offshore account match known laundering pathways used by multiple trafficking rings. Maria looked at Rick. You move now. Within minutes, an internal task force surrounded the security operations wing. Rick led the team, Axel at his side. As they entered Keller's office, the man looked up with practiced calm, but a flicker of recognition at Rick's presence betrayed deeper guilt. Can I help you, Agent Lawson? He asked smoothly. Rick's response was cold. You already have. Axel's low growl underscored the statement as tactical officers took Keller into custody. Under intense questioning, the cracks in Keller's facade quickly widened. Confronted with irrefutable digital evidence and the threat of federal conspiracy charges, he broke, voice trembling as he confessed. "They approached me 2 months ago," Keller admitted, said they needed routine clearance. "Nothing major." Then it escalated. Money kept coming. "They told me it was to facilitate special clients. I didn't ask questions." Rick's glare could have burned steel. "And you didn't stop when you saw the target was a child." Keller swallowed hard. "They said the kid wouldn't be harmed, just needed relocation. That's all I knew." Maria's voice was ice. "You knew enough." Further digging into Keller's communication logs revealed damning patterns. Beyond Drexler's crew, messages traced back to a wider network operating across major international hubs. An organization now flagged by Interpol and DHS under the codename Project Orpheus. Maria briefed Rick in hushed tones. Project Orpheus is a trafficking syndicate, specializing in acquiring children with disabilities. Primarily sensory impairments, neurodivergent conditions, anything that makes them harder to communicate distress and easier to control. Rick's stomach turned. "That's why, Ethan." Maria nodded grimly. "You're a prime target class for this network, easier to smuggle, less likely to be believed or tracked through traditional missing persons channels. They use shell buyers on the dark net, clients who place specific orders." Rick's eyes hardened, and Drexler was here to fulfill one of those orders. The depth of the operation was staggering. Further surveillance review uncovered additional meetings between Keller and unidentified operatives in the weeks leading up to the attempted abduction. Financial analysis revealed multiple overlapping accounts, funneling laundered payments through Eastern European fronts. As Rick processed the revelations, another alert flashed across the command center monitors. "Asian Chen," an analyst called out. "We've got flagged communications on Orpheus channels. Confirmation of priority extraction failure at JFK. Secondary directive issued." Rick leaned in. "Meaning they're still coming." Maria's face was grim. "Yes, they know Drexler's blown, but the rest of the cell is adapting. They'll likely attempt a fallback operation, possibly targeting alternate transit routes." Rick keyed his radio. "All units maintain red alert. Ethan Collins remains a primary target. Secure all exits, monitor perimeter." "We're not done yet." Nearby, Ethan remained under close protection, Axel never leaving his side. The boy's trust in the dog had only deepened as the day wore on. The German shepherd's steady presence a living shield against threats the child could scarcely comprehend. Margaret, though weary and shaken, remained resolute, her voice steady when Rick updated her. "You targeted Ethan because of who he is. Not for money, not for ransom, but because they see him as a commodity," Rick explained gently. Margaret's eyes burned with fury. "Then we stop them, whatever it takes." Maria approached, a new lead on her tablet. "Rick, we've traced another internal contact, possible handler coordinating with the remaining cell. Movement detected in Terminal 5 crossover." Rick's voice was iron. "We move now." As the team prepared to intercept, one final piece of intel arrived, one that would shift the battle once again and bring the hunters closer to the heart of the darkness they now faced. The intercept at Terminal 5 unfolded swiftly. Rick Lawson and Maria Chen led the tactical team through the crossover bridge, where the suspected handler had been tracked. The man apprehended without incident, but carrying yet another encrypted device linking back to Project Orpheus's expanding network. The fallout rippled through every layer of airport security and federal oversight, prompting immediate intervention from DHS and the Department of Justice. By evening, the entire cell embedded at JFK had been exposed, Keller's confession triggering a cascade of arrests and internal reviews. Yet, as the operation wound down, Rick's focus remained on a quieter priority: the small boy whose life had nearly been stolen beneath the terminal's bright lights. Ethan Collins remained under protective watch in the secured lounge, Axel stationed steadfastly at his side, the bond between them now unmistakable. The boy no longer clung to Margaret's hand alone, but rested comfortably against the German shepherd's sturdy frame, small fingers woven into thick fur with instinctive trust. Margaret herself watched with tear-brightened eyes, the depth of her gratitude, too vast for words. Rick approached quietly, crouching beside the pair, his voice low. "Ethan, you've been incredibly brave. We're very proud of you." The boy smiled faintly, one hand still resting on Axel's broad shoulder. Margaret spoke softly, voice steady. "How can we ever thank you for all of this?" Rick shook his head. "There's no thanks needed, but there is something you might want to know." He glanced toward Maria, who stepped forward holding a slim file. "Axel wasn't just any canine assigned here," Maria began gently. 3 years ago, during an operation in Prague, a trafficking cell targeting children with sensory impairments staged a similar abduction attempt. One of their intended victims was a 6-year-old girl, also deaf. The team Axel was part of intervened during the transport. He detected the same chemical signature we found today and led the agents to the hidden location before any harm. Rick continued. "After that case, Axel was reassigned stateside under special request. His handler wanted him placed where he could continue this kind of work. That's why he's here at JFK." Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her lips, her voice breaking. He saved another child like Ethan." Rick nodded. "And today he saved Ethan too." The boy seemed to understand more than words conveyed. He leaned closer into Axel, his small frame pressed firmly against the dog's side, a soft smile spreading across his face. Maria exchanged a glance with Rick. "The Bureau has already approved an exception request. Given Axel's unique history and his bond with Ethan, our office is formally recommending that he be permitted to serve as Ethan's certified travel companion for any future flights where protection is warranted." Margaret's breath caught. You mean Axel can stay with him?" Maria smiled. "With proper authorization, yes. He won't just be a canine anymore. He'll be Ethan's partner," Rick added. "We'll handle all the logistics. You won't have to face this alone again." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she looked down at her grandson, who now signed haltingly with one hand toward Axel. "Friend." The dog's ears flicked, eyes bright, a soft rumble of contentment vibrating through his chest. Rick rose, glancing toward Maria. "We've already arranged for initial training sessions, transitioning Axel from full enforcement canine to certified service guardian. Given his temperament and history, it's an easy fit," Maria added. "And Axel's old handler has already signed off. He said, let him go where he's needed most." As twilight fell across JFK, the terminal began to return to its usual rhythm. Flights resumed, announcements echoed once more. Unaware travelers moved past the remnants of an extraordinary day. In the secured lounge, however, something deeper had taken root. A bond forged not just in protection, but in understanding. For Ethan, who had faced a world so often difficult to navigate, Axel had become a bridge, a guardian who spoke no words yet offered absolute reassurance. For Axel, whose instincts had once again led to the saving of a child, this new chapter promised purpose beyond duty, a life not merely in service but in connection. As Rick watched the boy and the dog together, a rare smile touched his lips. "Some missions," he murmured, "are worth everything." Maria nodded. "And this one's only just." Plans were quickly set in motion. Training protocols expedited, travel certifications arranged, coordination with TSA and airline security mapped out in meticulous detail. Within days, the official clearance would be granted. On any future flight where Ethan traveled alone, Axel would accompany him, not as cargo, not as an incidental escort, but seated beside him as a full, recognized companion. Word of the story spread quietly through the ranks of law enforcement and the trafficking task force community. Agents who had once seen Axel as a formidable tool now spoke of him with reverence, a symbol of hope in a battle too often shadowed by darkness. And for Rick Lawson, who had trusted the dog's instincts from the first moment Axel had broken protocol to tip them off, there remained a profound sense of pride and gratitude. Days later, as the final debriefs concluded and federal agents prepared the next wave of takedowns linked to Project Orpheus, Rick found himself standing once more with Axel in the training yard, watching as Ethan and Margaret arrived for their first joint session. The boy's face lit up at the sight of his new companion, and as Axel bounded forward, tail high, Rick knew that some victories could not be measured in arrests or evidence seized, but in lives changed and futures reclaimed. As Ethan knelt beside the German Shepherd, arms wrapped around the dog's thick neck, the weight of the past days seemed to lift, replaced by something lighter, hope, trust, and the quiet promise of protection that would endure long after the headlines faded. Rick met Maria's gaze across the yard. Voice low but certain. "Let's make sure they always fly safe." Maria smiled. Axel at his side? "I think he already does." And as the sun dipped lower over the horizon, casting long golden beams across the tarmac, the boy and the dog sat together beneath its warmth. Two lives intertwined by fate, bound now not by fear but by friendship, and by a bond that no darkness could break. If this story moved you, and if you believe in the quiet courage of bonds like the one between Ethan and Axel, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share true stories of resilience, hope, and unexpected heroism, just like this one. I'm curious, what part of this journey resonated with you the most? Was it Axel's instinct, the hidden network that was uncovered, or the final bond between the boy and the dog? And where in the world are you watching this from today? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. The next story is already on the way, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.